So I'm Martha Minow, still the dean, and it is one of the great, great pleasures of being dean is that I get to invite people I admire to come and speak here. And so Chris Liu is right up there as someone I very much admire, our alum. And since April of this year, he has served as Deputy Secretary of Labor. And he has very interesting things to say from that vantage point. But if we only talk about that, you'll be missing a lot of other parts of his very important career and public service. He was Deputy Chief Counsel for Representative Waxman and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He was Special Advisor to Senator John Kerry's presidential campaign. He was Legislative Director and Acting Chief of Staff for Senator, maybe you heard of him, Barack Obama. He also played the crucial role of Executive Director of President-elect Obama's transition planning efforts. And you should ask him, at what point in the campaign did candidate Obama think that transition might be something to think about? He then played the role of the traffic cop as White House Cabinet Secretary and Assistant to the President, meaning every single piece of paper that went in front of President Obama went through Chris Liu. So this is the person who actually was running the government. And he also was co-chair of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. He took a brief period away from government to go and serve as a fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics and at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy and Center for the Study of Presidency and Congress, because he's that kind of guy. He's that kind of reflective person who wants to think about what does it mean to play these roles? What does it mean to be in public service? What are the ways in which the government works and doesn't work? So he's going to talk some, and then he's going to open it up for questions and comments. And I really am so grateful to Chris Liu for being here.
Thank you, Dean Minow, for inviting me here. I will say, in all fairness, that Dean Minow and I did this basic song and dance last week at an event in D.C., and so we really should kind of take this on the road. We've gotten it kind of down now. You know what? I have prepared remarks, and I don't really want to talk long. I thought what I would do instead is, maybe just dispense from, believe me, I'm not going to talk about labor law because I've only been there 7 months, and I really actually don't know much about the Department of Labor, which is actually an interesting story. I mean, we should actually talk about how one gets jobs in agencies running big things where they really don't know what happens. But I thought what I would do actually is instead talk a little bit about my career journey, because as I was coming here, I was reflecting back on the times that I came to hear speakers at Harvard and kind of wondering during the course of my career, how could I end up having similar careers to those people? And as I reflected upon that, it was pretty obvious that my career has been really a combination, I'd say, of more luck than skill. And the thing that Dean Minow actually didn't, and I will give her credit, twice she's introduced me and she's never said the important fact, which is that I was in Barack Obama's law school class. So the moral of the story is if you want to work in the White House 25 years from now, go to law school with the future president. And so assuming you can't do that, then all you can do is kind of make the best decisions along the way. And things have this way of working out. And even if they don't work out and you never end up in the White House, your career actually turns out quite fabulously instead. So, I graduated from law school here in '91, and I loved Harvard Law School, but really had no intention of being a lawyer. And I kind of knew that coming into Harvard. Went and took a clerkship, and then lo and behold found out, like, gosh, I have all these student loans. What am I going to do? So I went to go work at a law firm, Sidley Austin in D.C., and just to show how these connections all tied together, Dean Minow's father, Newt Minow, is really one of the luminaries of the Sidley firm in Chicago. And we could also talk, Newt played a very prominent role in attracting then law student Barack Obama to Sidley in Chicago, where he met his wife, Michelle Robinson. And so I went to Sidley in D.C., was doing general litigation. And I can say this honestly now, I was a horrible, horrible associate. And it wasn't that I wasn't smart enough. It wasn't that I didn't work hard enough. It's that fundamentally I didn't care about what I was doing. And I think that's a valuable lesson as all of you, navigate what to do with your career. If you don't find passion in it, it really doesn't matter how much you earn. It really doesn't matter about what a great office you have and the secretaries and all of the trappings of a great job. You're just not going to be good at it. The one great thing that came out of my time at Sidley is I met my future wife there. And if my wife were here, she would actually tell you that I was actually quite a bad attorney at the time, too. And so basically, before I almost got run out of the firm, I had the opportunity to go work on Capitol Hill, and as the dean said, I went to go work for Henry Waxman, who is one of the legendary members of Congress, and he's retiring this year. That was at the beginning of 1997. This was right after President Clinton had gotten reelected. You know, again, I didn't really want to be, I was hired to be an oversight lawyer, so I was doing investigations. That's not really what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do the nuts and bolts of how you draft bills, you know, the proverbial schoolhouse rock, you know, and I wanted to be the one who like led the little bill up the steps of Congress to get passed. But that wasn't possible because I actually didn't know a lick about drafting legislation. So I came in as an oversight lawyer because that was the job that was available to me. And bit by bit, I started getting additional responsibilities on how to draft legislation, and eventually, kind of within the course of 3 or 4 years, got the opportunity to really make that full transition. Now, the important part about this story, and I think I will kind of wrap this up at the end with some lessons I've learned along the way. The way that I got my job working for Henry Waxman is the staff director for Henry Waxman, a guy named Phil Schiliro, whose name will recur many times during the story, himself had been a candidate for Congress at one point. My best friend from the 3rd grade had run his congressional campaign. And so I asked my friend, and my friend made a phone call. And really, actually, what you will learn in Washington, what you'll learn in life, basically, is your ability to get in touch with somebody is really not based on a resume coming across someone's desk. It's somebody picking up the phone and vouching for you to somebody else. And that's how I got my first job. So I had the opportunity to work for Henry Waxman for 8 years, loved it. And as the dean said, I went to work for John Kerry in 2004 on his presidential campaign. I had my West Wing office all picked out. That didn't work out very well, and came back to work for Henry Waxman. So one day, my staff director, this gentleman named Phil Schiliro, came to me and said, hey, would you be interested in being the legislative director for Senator Hillary Clinton? I said, sure, I'd love to interview for that job. I went to interview for that job. And then a week later, Phil came back and said, hey, didn't you go to law school with Barack Obama? He's looking for a legislative director as well. And he had just been elected to the US Senate. So this is a classic, you get to the fork in the road. And I would love to tell you that I was so smart that I made the right choice. But here's the moral story. I didn't get the Clinton job. And I would say this, and I'd like to think that had I gotten both jobs, I would have taken the Obama job simply because I had the connection with the senator. But I didn't. So I got the Obama job, went to go work for Senator Obama. First time we met was in the basement. First time we got reacquainted was in the basement of the Dirksen House Senate office building, which is one of the dumpier buildings. He was 99th in seniority. It was a temporary office. It was kind of halfway between the cafeteria and the loading dock. So there was kind of this weird wafting of smells through his office. And we sat down, and we hadn't really kept in touch since law school. And he said, so what have you been up to since Cambridge? And that was really the beginning of a conversation that has now spanned the better part of the last decade. And he hired me on the spot, really with knowing that I didn't really know anything about the US Senate. I had not a whole lot of legislative experience. And the crucial part of the story as well is that I mentioned this gentleman, Phil Schiliro, who had been my mentor on the House side. He vouched for me with the person that Obama picked as his chief of staff, a guy named Pete Rouse. They had been friends for many, many years. So basically, one mentor kind of passed me over to my next mentor. And I was having a great time in the US Senate. My job as the legislative director was to help him write his legislation, to figure out how he wanted to vote on things. And it was fantastic. As all of you remember back in the time, coming in 2004, he had this great potential. He had just given this remarkable speech at the convention in Boston in 2004. Our job was basically to put the meat on the bones and help him develop into the next coming of, whatever the great Senate leader is. No idea, and honestly, that he would ever run for president. In 2005, 2006, as some of you may remember, he was writing a book, 2005, 2006, he was writing a book called Audacity of Hope. And we talk a little about what it's like to help a US senator write a book. And it was cleverly timed so that it would come out in the fall of 2006, right at the time when he would be out campaigning for Democratic candidates for the U.S. Senate. And he went on Oprah. He did the cold opening to Monday Night Football, and the book just exploded. And he would go out and do events for U.S. senators or people running for the U.S. senator, and he would get 1,000, 2,000 people. I mean, 1,000 people don't show up anywhere to hear a Senate candidate. And we retake the Senate in 2006. Book is flying off the shelves. And at that point, there started to be this conversation. Wow, maybe we're tapping into something. Maybe there's this groundswell that could really he could really energize people. And I remember the senior colleague from Illinois, Senator Dick Durbin, said to him, you don't pick the time picks you. And we recognized full well that casting another 100 votes, 1,000 votes, 10,000 votes in the US Senate would not make him a better presidential candidate. And on a very cold day in February of 2007, he announced his candidacy at the old State House in Springfield, Illinois. So during this period of time, our entire Senate staff left and went to go work on the campaign, except for me. I was left to kind of keep the trains running on time. And it's, again, I'll date myself, but there are folks that remember that there was the old, I don't know if it's a Whirlpool ad or the one with the repairman who would sit there and he would have nothing to do. Maytag. The Maytag Repairman, he would sit there, he had nothing to do. And the reason he had nothing to do was because the Maytag appliances were so good. And it had a feeling like you're sitting around waiting for something to happen and nothing is happening. And at this period of time, our entire Senate staff leaves. Our communications director was Robert Gibbs, who eventually became the White House press secretary. Our speechwriter was John Favreau, who became the White House speechwriter. They're off. Everyone's out, and the action is in New Hampshire and Iowa and all these kinds of places. And I'm kind of left holding the bag. And and that was my job. And I did my job, and that's what I was supposed to do. The senator came back in April of 2008, and he wasn't really there at all in 2007, 2008 anymore. He was off campaigning, and that was really the right place for him to be. And he came back in 2008, in April of 2008, and he was there for a vote on Iraq. And we're walking to the Senate floor, and he's asking me how things are going. And I said, yeah, things are fine, but it's kind of boring. I'd really like to go join your campaign in Chicago. And he said, we talked about it. You need to stay here. We need to still try to get legislation done. At this point, we knew that Senator McCain would be our likely opponent. So we wanted to make sure that if there were difficult votes in the U.S. Senate, we could still have a good reaction to them. But then he said to me as an afterthought, if you can think of something to help me in Washington, let me know. And I just threw out, well, how about plan your presidential transition? And we use the word audacity a lot in Obama world, and this is actually quite audacious if you think about it. April of 2008, we were still months away from wrapping up the nomination, and we were still 5 or 6 months away, 6 months away from the presidential election. And he said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And we can tell the story later on why we did the transition planning so early. But the real reason why I got to run the presidential transition is because I was the last one there in Washington. So as we go through the story, you'll notice that there's serendipity along the way, there's luck along the way. So I started planning the presidential transition. The day after Election Day, I get named formally the executive director of the transition. A week later, I get called into the office of our incoming chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel. And if any of you are from Chicago or know Rahm by reputation, he's got a little bit of a potty mouth. And this was hands down the only meeting I've ever had with Rahm Emanuel in the several years I worked with him where he didn't just curse at me. And his assistant said, Rahm wants to sit and talk to you about what job you want in the administration. So I'd had this whole list of jobs that I wanted. And I went into Rahm's office, and before I could even say what I wanted, he said, I want you to be the White House cabinet secretary. I literally had no idea what that meant. But when Rahm Emanuel offers you a job, you basically, it's like the mob, you take the job. And so I took the job, and it was a fantastic opportunity to be at the intersection of policy and communications with the White House and all the cabinet agencies. And you know, on about an hour after the president got sworn in on January 20th of 2009, went to my office in the West Wing and started working. And it was a magnificent time. But we could talk about what that was like, going through the recession, going through healthcare, going through, you know, the pullout of troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, all the different crises we had to deal with during those first 4 years. And I was fairly sure that I had some more service in me after the president got reelected. And you know, I think it was the momentum and the energy and enthusiasm from the election. But literally the morning after he got inaugurated again, sworn in again, I went into the president's office and said, I'm done. And I said, look, it's not that I'm done serving you, but you know, we've gone through a lot together. And I'm not done serving you, but I'm done for now. And so I just walked away from what I thought was my dream job. Literally had no idea what I was going to do next in my career. And as the dean said, I had this amazing experience having affiliations with different universities. I did some speaking, I did some writing, I did some teaching and consulting. And then the call came back to say, hey, you know, I got a call from our current Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, another wonderful graduate of this institution, who said, hey, I'd love you to be the Deputy Secretary of Labor. I said, Tom, you know I don't know anything about labor policy. And he said, that's okay. And so I got nominated in January of this year, had a miraculously quick confirmation, and have been on the job for the last 7 months. And so this is an amazing journey. And I tell all this to you for a couple reasons. All of you are bright, you're ambitious, you've got plans. You know what you're going to do 5 years from now, you know what you're going to do 10 years from now. I'm here as living proof to tell you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, I would not have predicted that what my career was going to be like. I ended up where I am precisely because I was a terrible lawyer at a law firm. I ended up on the Obama path because the Clinton path had been closed off to me. I happened to actually have a wonderful connection with the president, but I had two wonderful mentors along the way. Phil Schiliro, who incidentally became the head of legislative affairs at the White House for the first term, and was really one of the people instrumental in passing health care reform, who passed me to my second mentor, Pete Rouse, who became counselor to the president. And for the first term of the White House, I had my two mentors literally within stone's throw away from me, and that's an amazing experience to have. I had no idea I would be in this job 2 years ago. I know 2 years from now, I know I'll still be at the Department of Labor, but 2.5 years from now, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And it's wonderful. And so I guess, you know, if I have to leave you with a couple life lessons, and we'll certainly open up to questions. I do know more about labor policy. So if you got to talk about labor policy, we can talk about labor policy. We can talk about politics. We can talk about elections. We can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. I guess I'd leave you with a couple points. One is, as hard as it is to do, stay away from those 5-year plans. Stay away from those 10-year plans. Again, not a bad thing to have a vision of what you want to do. But if you stick mindlessly to those plans, wonderful opportunities along the way will pass you by. Also be cognizant of the fact that, you know, this is not your parents' generation. This is not your grandparents' generation. You're not going to work at GM or IBM for the next 40 years of your life. You're not going to, when you're not my age, you're not going to know that, hey, I'm a vice president now. 5 years from now, I'm going to be a senior vice president. I mean, those are not the career paths any of us will take. You will have 15 jobs, 20 jobs during your careers. Some will be fantastic. Some won't be fantastic. And actually, the ones that aren't really good are the ones that you almost learn as much from. And at the end of your career, you know, if you were to plot out all your jobs on a graph, it might just be a random series of dots. You might be able to draw a line through them. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a random series of 15 jobs. And if that happens, that's okay. So number one, first thing I'd say is don't get stuck on the 5 or 10 year paths, 5 or 10 year career goals. Be willing to take chances with your career. Every job I've had, the last like 3 or 4, I've taken pay cuts for. And so certainly as I tell people, look, if you don't want to be in a large law firm, and again, there's no knock on large law firms. If you don't want to be in a large law firm your entire life, certainly don't live like a large law firm lawyer. You know, I will say in all honesty, this actually, it would be unfair if I didn't say this. So my wife, who I met at a law firm, actually did become a partner at Sidley Austin. You know, so if you don't want to be a partner, actually marrying a partner works out pretty well too. And, but you know, again, in fairness to my wife, she spent 19 years at Sidley, joined the administration in 2009, and she's now the general counsel at the Department of Transportation. So she's got the love of public service too. Second thing I'd say to you is, you know, whatever task is given to you in your jobs, whatever that job that might be, whether it's in politics, whether it's in a law firm, do it well. I fundamentally believe that if you can't do the little things well, you're not going to do the big things well. I think the biggest mistake I made as a first, second, third year associate, you know, I graduated from Harvard, I clerked on the Court of Appeals. I thought I was a big deal. And when you're a litigation associate, they basically throw you into document review. And I just didn't take it seriously. And that certainly showed in my work product. And I will always regret that I was not a better associate at a law firm, because even if I recognized it was not the right career path for me, I should have put more of an effort into it. But particularly for those of you who are interested in going into politics, into public service, the thing you will learn is that Washington is full of people who have started their careers in the mailroom, who have started as drivers, who have started answering phones, who have eventually made their way all the way up. So whatever task is given to you, do it well, and that will definitely get noticed. The third thing I'd say to you is that the most important thing in public service and politics, one of the most important things in politics, if you decide to go down that route, is your reputation. Washington is a very, very small place. Everybody knows everybody. How you treat people matters. Whether you have a strong work ethic, a strong sense of character, whether you're seen as a decent person, matters. And I simply say that to all of you because I know, you know, there's this sense that if I'm just this hard-charging person, if I'm just the, you know, the proverbial alpha male, that's how I get ahead. And I'm here to tell you that I actually think you can be a nice person and succeed in politics. One of the things that I do when I'm hiring people for jobs is, particularly those of people who have been in politics, I never ever ask them for references. Because if you can't give me 3 people who are going to say nice things about you, you probably don't know 3 people. What I will do is I'll look at your resume, particularly if you've been in politics, and I've been around long enough that I can basically find somebody I know who worked in that organization around the same time as you. And I just start cold calling people. And I'll say, hey, I'm interviewing, you know, John Smith. What do you think of John? I might be interviewing your boss. I might be interviewing your colleague. I might be interviewing the random mailroom guy who either you said hello to and were nice to, or who you didn't say hello to or nice to. I want to find out generally what your reputation was. The corollary to all of this, I'd say, is, again, I think in general, it is a good thing to be careful about social media and how long this lives on. You know, I grew up and I do tweet, so I'm not going to say I don't tweet. But in this day and age, when people are used to living their life out in the open, particularly if you're in Washington, there's not a day that goes by where somebody doesn't say or do something on social media that gets them in trouble. I think it was Senator Cruz's deputy chief of staff last week who tweeted that, you know, Ebola happened because of Obamacare. You know, factually untrue, but you know, quickly deleted it. But you know, in the world of social media, nothing ever gets deleted. So again, this is not to say you should not have strongly held opinions. In fact, to get these kinds of jobs, you actually have to build a name for yourself. You have to be known for something. But there is a tendency in this world of 140-character tweets to be as clever as possible. And I think sometimes people make the mistake. And believe me, those things carry on for much, much longer. When I went through my Senate confirmation hearings, when I was interviewed by the Republican committee staff for the Senate Health Committee, they asked me about my tweets. And I knew all full well every single thing I tweet. I basically tweet about politics or sports. And generally, I tweet about sports more than I tweet about politics. And so I said, yeah, happy to talk to you about baseball, whatever you want to ask about. So that's the third thing. Just reputation counts in D.C. And then I think the last thing I'd say, which is not only a good rule in politics, but I think a good rule in general, is develop mentors. Develop mentors. When I started at Sidley, on day one, they said to me, hey, we've assigned you to this mentor. Okay, didn't know who the guy was. Took me out to lunch, literally never saw the guy again after that point. That is not how mentoring begins. Mentors are based on common personalities, common work ethics, personalities, a sense of trust, a relationship. And when you find a good mentor, you stick to those people because those people can be invaluable in guiding you through your career. So let me just wrap it up and simply say this. I appreciate all of you being here. I know it is no easy feat getting a room full of 100-some Harvard Law students together, and I'm sure the pizza certainly helped a little bit. But I'm here to say, so it means a lot to me to come back to the school and talk to all of you. And if I can impart upon you a little bit in terms of the value of public service or the value and simply of not scripting out your entire life, hopefully it was worth an hour of your time. So let me stop there and spend the last half hour or so taking questions. We can take it on any topic. Sir.
So first let me say thank you very much for coming out and speaking. At the beginning you mentioned how you had that dream of being on Capitol Hill and getting the bill through, and I had that dream too before. But now Congress is so gridlocked, it doesn't look likely that much anything major is going to get passed. So how does that influence your work at the Department of Labor, knowing that Congress really isn't probably going to do anything massive?
Well, it's wonderful as the Department of Labor because we have incredible regulatory authority. You know, we basically regulate every single worker in this country. We regulate almost every single workplace in this country. So the president has been very clear that if Congress doesn't act, he will act himself. And so we have a very ambitious regulatory agenda for the next 2 years. Now, the flip of that's going to be if the Senate flips, which we can talk a little bit more about, there's going to be the potential for riders, which are basically appropriations language that says you may not spend funds on X purpose. And we haven't largely seen those over the last 4 years, five or 6 years, but we probably will see more of them. I think the broader point about legislation and what the value of government is, I think is an important one. I know for those of you that are thinking about government work, particularly if you're thinking about legislative work, you think about the interesting, sexy places to come to work in Washington. And it's certainly a fascinating place to be. The other thing I'd impart upon all of you is simply to say, if that is where if your heart is in government work, give a serious look to state and local government. State and local government, I think at this time, is one of the most interesting places to work. And I guarantee on any issue that you want to work on, probably with the exception of national security issues, which really have to be at the national level, you can make as significant an impact in local government as you can at the federal level. Let me give you a perfect example. If you had wanted to work on health care reform, the bill that we had passed in 2010, at any time, basically every president at some point since Teddy Roosevelt has worked on health care reform. You could have basically worked on Capitol Hill for the last 100 years, and there were only been a 2-year period of time where there was serious legislation happening. Now, that's not to say we had Medicare during that time, we had Medicaid during that time, but if the dream of universal health care, and we're not quite there yet, but the closest we came was in 2010, that would have been the 2-year period of time. The rest of the time, you would have been better off, frankly, staying here in the state of Massachusetts, where you actually could have had a big impact on health care. If you care about climate change, we're not going to have a climate change bill passed in the next 2 years, next 4 years, maybe next 10 years. But you can go work in a progressive city like Chicago, like Boston, like New York, and make a significant impact in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I would even say to you, you can go work at a major corporation like Walmart and have a more significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions than you could trying to write a piece of legislation in Congress right now. If you could get Walmart to, improve the sustainability of their stores, of their supply chain, that's a significant impact. Now, none of that takes the place of national legislation, and there are certainly things that can only be handled through legislation. A prime example is immigration reform. But there's a big difference you can make in other realms. And so I simply ask any of you who are thinking about public service to consider state and local as well. Yes?
So speaking of state and local governments and your role in the Department of Labor, in my labor law reading class, we're talking about a lot of areas where labor law doesn't really regulate certain types of employment, like Uber, internships, college athletes. So do you see, what does the Department of Labor see as its role in taking the lead on these new types of labor regimes versus letting states and local governments?
This is a fantastic question. I mean, Department of Labor, we kind of do 2 different things. We train people for jobs, and we spend up billions and billions of dollars training people for the jobs of the 21st century. And then we protect workers in their workplaces, and that could be, making sure that, this desk is, built the way it is, or that I'm not going to trip on the way outside. It's making sure that the people that work here at Harvard are paid the wages they're entitled to. It's protecting people's pensions. That being said, the workplace in general has evolved, and it's going to continue to evolve. None of you are going to want to go to an employer where you sit behind a desk for 9 o'clock to 6 p.m. That's not what this workforce is about anymore. People aren't going to be in jobs for the next 30 or 40 years at the same place. That changes how we regulate pensions. More and more people decide, what, I want to be an independent contractor. I want to work out of my home. I don't actually want to be a salaried employee. The sharing economy, whether it's Uber, whether it's Lyft, whether it's Airbnb, has transformed what it means to be an employer anymore, what it means to be an employee anymore. You also have a situation where people are switching jobs. You also have a situation where the workforce is aging, and people want to work into their 60s or 70s. One of the fascinating things I learned about recently was CVS, the pharmacy store, has started this new experiment, this new pilot, where they recognize that in Florida and the other kind of snowbird places in the wintertime, they need additional workers at CVS because, the old people go and they need to fill their drugs. And so what they did is they've offered to their employees in Minnesota, Michigan, and kind of the traditional Rust Belt states, hey, if you're going to vacation or if you're interested in vacationing in Florida during the winter, why don't we transfer you from Minnesota to Florida to come work there part-time along the way? It's a creative way of shifting how people work and a better understanding of the changing and constantly evolving dynamics of work. So I can't really answer your question directly because I think it's still evolving, but I think this is one of the areas that I think not only the Department of Labor, but I think government in general has to catch up on. The world is changing, and the scope of how we regulate the world hasn't quite caught up yet. Yes?
So going back to your comment on the regulatory, about your ability to regulate at the Department of Labor, I don't know if you can answer this, but I know that Secretary Perez is really interested in having paid family leave, and assuming the Family Act doesn't pass, would this be an area that the President is interested in issuing an executive order for federal employees to have paid family leave?
Yeah, there's actually a fascinating chart about, and we've actually used all these kinds of interesting kind of motion graphics to kind of demonstrate the small number of countries in the world that don't have national paid leave. And I think the U.S. is one of like 3 or 4 now. And of the industrialized countries, certainly, we're the only one that does not have paid leave. So as we talk more broadly about expanding opportunity for people, it's not only expanding opportunity so people can get the jobs of the 21st century, people can really live out what the American dream. It's all about how we create a more inclusive workplace in general and how you close pay gaps and wage inequities. And part of that, and one of the reasons why there remains to be a pretty consistent pay gap between men and women is on paid leave. Women have children, women become the primary caregiver of their children, of aging parents. They end up leaving the workforce in that, or they end up having to work fewer number of hours. The issue about federal employees, I think, is a good one. We don't have actually a uniform paid leave throughout the federal government, and it's something that we need to do a better job on. But again, this is another issue going back to the broader point about state and local government. There is a movement now in a variety of states to create more paid leave. California just signed a paid leave law. I think New Jersey and New York are also considering as well. So again, another area where the states are leading the federal government. As to what we should do at the national level, we'll see. Good question, though. Dean Minow.
So I have 2 related questions. You've talked very interestingly on other occasions about the difference between being a process person and a substance person. So could you describe what that is and help people diagnose themselves? So process versus substance. And the second is you've worked in all 3 branches of government, and not a lot of people have done that. So if you could give some reflections on what's doable in each of the branches and how do they relate?
The process-substance thing is a dichotomy I'm not sure I immediately understood. It came to me about 5 years ago. I was doing an informational interview with the son of a friend of mine. And, the kid comes in and I'm expecting to dispense wisdom to him. And the minute he sits down, he goes, you know what? My dad says that there are substance people and process people. Which are you? And I'm like, whoa, that's really insightful. And so I've thought a lot about this. I'm clearly a process person. And I do think as you all evolve through your careers, it's important to know, like, do you like to be the expert on something? Do you like to be kind of honing in and kind of spending your whole time on something? Or do you like to keep trains moving on time? I'm a trains running on time person, which is essentially why I'm at the Department of Labor. I manage our budget, I manage HR, I manage IT, I manage our policy agenda. It is the goal to keep this entire 17,000 person department going in the same direction. Now, that being said, you can't be solely a process person and not know substance. You know, if you want to use the analogy of keeping trains running on time, you have to know what each of the trains are. You have to know which train goes ahead of the other train. To give you a perfect example, we have about 80-some regulations that we are working on at the Department of Labor. How we sequence all 80 requires a pretty intensive understanding of what each of those 80 does, what the political ramifications of getting them done, what the impediments will be, and so that you actually just have to dig into it. But I like moving around to lots of different things. I like managing big projects. You know, if you put me in front of a table and said, hey, I want you to write a law review article or write a policy paper, I could certainly do it. It's not intuitive to me, and it's certainly not how I derive, great satisfaction at work. So I think understanding that is very important. To the broader question about the three branches of government, I've been in all three branches. I've been in the House and Senate. I've been actually in the executive branch, both in the White House and the agency. So I don't think there's many other places I could be at this point now. Hands down, one of the best jobs I've ever had was clerking for a federal judge. Short of you actually becoming a judge someday in your life, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. The legislative branch is kind of a crazy place to be. And I think you have to like policy to be in the legislative branch, but you have to love politics because it's all about politics in the legislative branch. It is kind of hand-to-hand combat all day long, and winning is often as much about political gains as they are about policy gains. The executive branch is kind of a different animal. The White House is, I'd say it's frankly more of a political place. Now being at the Department of Labor, it's kind of an interesting venue. I mean, we have 17,000 employees. Of those 17,000, we have about 100 political appointees. So it's 100 people trying to steer a really big ship that is heading in a certain direction, and you're trying as hard as you can to steer it in a different way. The people who are on the ship with you, these career employees, they know they will always outlast you. I spend time with, in fact, I'm going to spend time with our employees here in Boston later on this afternoon and tomorrow. Whenever I meet with them, I always say, hey, tell me not only your name, but where you work for the department, but how long you've been there. Routinely, you get people that have been there 30 or 40 years. They have seen so many deputy secretaries. They've seen so many secretaries. They've had way too many initiatives come across their plate, and they know full well if they don't love the initiative, believe me, in 2 more years it will change into something else. And so your ability to turn that ship, your ability to affect change is really dependent on the buy-in you get from the career employees. And so I spend a lot of time talking to our career employees about what we are trying to do, and not just ordering them to do things. And I think if you get their buy-in, you're more likely to turn the ship. The complicating thing in a federal agency is I can't easily hire any of you. We do have a wonderful honors program, so I hope you will apply for that. But aside from programs like that, I can't easily hire anybody. I certainly can't easily fire somebody. I can't easily promote the good people, and I can't necessarily penalize those who aren't good. So you're kind of like, you're the captain of a team, and you can't actually swap out any of your players. And you have to figure out how to play the best game you can with the team that you have. Yes, back there.
I had a question that sort of expands on that substance versus process distinction. And I wanted to ask about the process within the agency and the process across agencies. I was thinking about this in terms of Ron Klain, who doesn't have any substantive expertise in Ebola, but is very well known for working extremely well across agencies. And I know you probably have that from being cabinet secretary. So could you talk a little bit about sort of the difference between making your own trains run on time and about knowing about everybody else's portfolio and coordinating across that?
You know, that I spent more of my time as the White House cabinet secretary. People always say it's a little bit like herding cats. And I say, well, it's like herding cats, but if cats had really big egos. And just as a side, I remember asking Kathleen Sebelius when she was the secretary of HHS, I said, how is this job different than being the governor of Kansas? And she said, when I was the governor of Kansas, I didn't have a boss. And now I have a boss, and the boss is the White House. And the boss is not necessarily just the president. It's every 25-year-old from the White House who picks up the phone and feels like ordering around HHS doing anything. So, you know, it is one of the hardest things in government is to figure out how all the pieces move together. For those of you that are really interested in history, you can go back and look. I mean, when the government was founded in 1789, there were only 4 cabinet agencies. There was the Attorney General, there was the State Department, there was the Secretary of War, and the Treasury Department. There was no Energy Department, because what was energy in 1789? It was wood. You know, that's like, they probably should have had a Homeland Security Department, but they just had forts. So as the country has gotten more complex, government has gotten more complex. You know, again, if you are into history and if you had a chance to read Team of Rivals, which is the wonderful book about President Lincoln and his cabinet, you will recall that almost every single day during the Civil War, the Secretary's cabinet would show up at the White House and they would discuss the conduct of the war. That doesn't happen anymore because the federal government is so complicated. You don't necessarily want your Secretary of Homeland Security at the White House every single day responding to whatever crisis, because he or she has an enormous department of 250,000 people that not only deals with border security, it deals with TSA, it deals with immigration, it deals with the Coast Guard, it deals with the Secret Service. And so the jobs in these agencies is basically managing enormous programs. So again, just to go back to more immediately to your question, the ability to make all of these individual players work well is understanding what they do and understanding how you can get them to do what you want them to do. Because the truth of the matter is each secretary of an agency has their own authorities. They have their own funding stream. If they don't feel like cooperating with the White House, they don't necessarily have to cooperate with the White House. And why, you know, the selection of Ron Klain as the Ebola czar has been criticized, and I think rightfully so in a couple of respects. I mean, I don't know that Ron is a very close friend, and he'll do fantastic. It certainly sent the message that this is a political problem and a communications problem versus a public health problem. That being said, there's nobody who understands the federal government better than Ron Klain. He was the one who spearheaded the 2009-2010 Recovery Act, the stimulus. He knows how to make trains run on time, and he knows what's in every one of those train cars. So he'll do fantastic. But that is one, I think, the struggles at the White House. You have a lot of people running around the White House who have worked on campaigns, who are political people. They've never spent time running government. And you have to actually know how government works in order to manage it. Come on, you guys are asked actually serious questions. No one has fun questions. No one wants to know about. Actually, by the way, Professor Max here. He can also talk about Barack Obama from law school as well.
So the fun question is, if not Hillary Clinton in 2016, who?
It is hard for me to imagine, actually. I mean, again, I can't speculate on the Republican side. It is hard for me to imagine that Hillary Clinton is not the Democratic nominee if she wants, assuming she wants to run. And again, I have no insights as to it. It is, again, if you, like, going back to the question about paid leave, take a look at countries around the world who have women leaders. These aren't even particularly progressive countries that have women leaders. And the fact that we have not had a female president in this country is just stunning to me. Again, without getting political, without, it's hard to imagine also based on qualifications, somebody who's more qualified to be president than her. So that's, my political prognostication. But I will say this, having worked on a presidential campaign several years out, and we were, in the fall of 2007, maybe 4 months before the Iowa caucuses, we were in third place, like a pretty distant third place behind Hillary Clinton and John Edwards. The fact that you can kind of, catch lightning in a bottle, the primary process is actually sort of a crazy process too. People who come out of nowhere, have this amazing ability to pull ahead. But again, you know, this far out, it's hard to imagine that she's not the odds-on favorite at this point. Yes?
This is the opposite of a fun question, but
okay.
I'm wondering if you could talk about what you think will happen in the midterm elections and what you think like the implications of that will be both for the president's, like, and the president's.
You know, look, I mean, obviously, look, I'm a Democrat, and I will hope for good things. I think it's if you were if you were a betting person, it's not, you know, it's not great for my team at this point. But I think fundamentally, I don't know that it will change what the dynamic is in Washington. You know, with a 55-45 majority in the Senate, it hasn't been like we've gotten anything done the last couple years anyway. If it flips and it's a, you know, 52 Republican, 48 Democrat, it's hard to imagine much will get done. The president, I think, has only vetoed like 2 or 3 bills. What is that, 2 bills he's vetoed during his first 6 years. He will be vetoing a lot of legislation. So, you know, again, important symbolism, but really not much happens. You can guarantee that there will be more investigations and oversight. So from our perspective in an agency, that's not optimal. You know, it is, as somebody who has had to testify on the Hill, the amount of time it takes to prepare to testify is incredible. And this is the, you know, the thing. I mean, again, as somebody who has spent time in all 3 branches, I understand the purpose of the legislative branch to conduct oversight. But when you had, you know, 2 weeks ago, the head of the CDC, Tom Frieden, up testifying, again, regardless of whether you think Tom Frieden has done a good job or not, no questions that were asked of Tom Frieden in those oversight hearings on the Hill have prevented Ebola. And I would want Tom Frieden not preparing for a hearing. I'd want him out trying to solve this problem. I remember during the 2010 oil spill, you guys remember there was a big oil spill down the Gulf Coast. It was routine. Again, Democrats and Republicans would call up members of the cabinet to talk about the oil spill and what they were doing to stop the oil from coming out and the environmental damage and the economic damage. Not a single question that was asked ever stopped the oil from coming out. It's some really smart people at the Department of Interior and the Energy Department who were able to figure that out. So if you love the last 2 years, you're going to love the next 2 years because I think it's going to get very, very ugly. But you know, the upside about it is that the energy, literally, the race will be after Election Day next Tuesday, how quickly people start running for president. You know, the timeline has gotten longer and longer. The amount of money that you need to raise has gotten more and more. So again, regardless of who controls the Senate next week, I'm not overly optimistic that there's going to be a lot that's going to happen. And pretty quickly, we're going to be into 2016 election politics.
Time for one more question.
One more question. Yes, sir.
How do you go about starting to plan a presidential transition? Like, what's the first day of doing that?
So I will tell the one story, and again, I'll date myself a little bit, but there are folks in this room who will get this. And so the dean asked, you know, why we started planning early. Barack Obama and I had kind of a shared love of, well, I've loved political movies, and if sometime I'm happy to give you like my favorite political movies. But there was one movie in particular that we always talked about, and it was a 1972 movie called The Candidate. And those of you who are too young to remember, but you know, it stars Robert Redford, and Robert Redford was, you know, quite the catch back in the 1970s. And he plays this young, idealistic person who's running for the U.S. Senate in California. Underdog miraculously wins. He's standing off stage. The final scene of the movie, he's standing off stage, preparing to come on stage and, you know, declare victory. And before he walks on stage, he says to one of his staffers, "So now what do I do?" And we never wanted to be the proverbial dog who caught the car and on election night be going like, well, now what do we do? So we started planning very, very early. And in part, that was because this would be the first post-9/11 transition. And so we knew we needed to take it seriously. So I'll be honest, when I got the assignment to plan the transition, the first thing I did is talk to other people who have planned democratic transitions. Now, that's not actually a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who actually had planned transitions that they never got to implement. So I first went to the Kerry people. The Kerry people gave me all their stuff. I went to the Gore people. The Gore people gave me all the stuff. But again, this is, and we did obviously talk to the Clinton people as well. But you know, it's one of these wonderful things. Like you can plan to build a rocket ship, but unless the rocket ship has to launch, you actually never know whether it works or not. But that being said, I mean, there were a couple things we ended up doing. First, we ended up having to sort of canvass all of the policy proposals that we had made during the campaign and kind of boil them down into things that we needed to get done, things that we didn't need to get done, how you sequence them. So policy was a big part of it. Personnel is a big part. You needed to not only staff your White House, you needed to staff your cabinet. You had important national security positions that needed to be filled. You need to figure out the sequencing of how you did those first. And then there was just and then we ended up doing a pretty deep dive into about 50 of the major federal agencies, and you basically had to go in there and kind of figure out, like, what are the time bombs, the ticking time bombs in there that are going to explode during your first 30, 60, 90 days? Who are the good people? Who are the bad people? What are the decisions you need to make? While all this is happening, you will recall in the fall of 2008, the economy is imploding. So we had wonderful plans on healthcare, energy, and all of those plans actually got pushed aside, and you had to move straight to the economy. And so what it required is that you have a lot of planning, but then you had to be very nimble as well. You also ended up having nominations that blew up. You've had, you know, so the ability to react quickly was important as well. You know, I'm proud of the work we did. You know, you always feel like you can do more work. But you know, the problems and certainly the challenges we've had over the last 6 years of the administration, I think, have not been the result of poor planning before we got there. And I think given the fact that things were evolving as fast as they did and that we were able to get a stimulus passed out of Congress, I think maybe a week or two after we came into office, and get $800 billion out the door relatively quickly, stave off what was the worst economic downturn in anyone's lifetime around here, I think is a testament to our planning. So I'm happy with what we did.
So please join me in thanking Chris Lu for his